You know, a lot of people consider the Caterpie and Weedle lines to be almost twins. They're both from the same region, they start in a small worm-like form, evolve to a chrysalis state, and then have final larger forms with wings. And they both tend to evolve pretty quickly. But there are a few major differences that one would need to take into consideration when looking at the two lines. Welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, an ongoing series where we take a look at certain species of Pokemon and how you would care for them in your own home. As I'm sure you figured out, we're going to be talking about the Weedle evolutionary line today. And to preface this, a lot of this is going to be similar to the Caterpie line's care guide. While they are two different species, I will give you that their first two evolutions are very similar. Weedle is a foot-long worm-like Pokemon with a yellowish-brown color to its exoskeleton, a large round head, and it has two barbs on either end of its body, the front of which secretes a highly poisonous, poison. The second evolution, Kakuna, is a yellow 2-foot-long chrysalis with two dark black eyes on the top. It's very similar to Metapod. But the last evolution is where they begin to differ. Beedrill is a 3-foot-tall winged bug with a mostly yellow body that has black stripes on its abdomen. Oh yeah, and 3 poisonous barbs, one on its abdomen and one on each arm. They are wicked sharp, and like I said, highly poisonous. But just because it's got a poison touch doesn't mean that it can't be a good Pokemon to have. And who knows, it might just be the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Before we begin, I'm going to put a bit of a disclaimer here for a few things. One is that you should understand that this Pokemon line is often and widely considered a pest Pokemon species. Weedle and Beedrill have a habit of building their homes in or near places where people live. And that is a problem because Beedrill are very territorial and will attack anything that enters what they consider to be their space. There are plenty of reports of people being stung by Beedrill online. Professionals will oftentimes need to be called in to deal with the infestation by catching all the Pokemon with Pokeballs and relocating them to a better and safer location. One of my childhood friends actually grew up to become a pest control trainer. He always did have a thing for bug types, especially, funny enough, Beedrill. But speaking of needing to call in a professional, that brings me to another point. These Pokemon are the first ones we're going to be going over that will actively attack people. The closest we have come to that in this series is a Charizard, but they will often ignore people as they tend to think we aren't worth their time, essentially. Beedrill have no such problem going for people, and because of that extreme territorial nature, you will need a permit to own a Beedrill, or really any of the Weedle line. Permits allow you to legally keep certain species of Pokemon that governments deem dangerous. Getting one involves being tested on your knowledge of how to care for the Pokemon, how to interact with them safely, and how to possibly deal with being injured by one of them. Once a tester deems that you know what you're doing and can care for the Pokemon accurately, you'll get your permit. Mostly, the Pokemon that require permits to keep are a lot of the poison types, plenty of fire and dragon types, and a smattering of the other types. A type of Pokemon isn't inherently dangerous, but some types, like poison, have more dangerous members than others. So, with those disclaimers out of the way, let's talk about Weedle. Enclosure. To be honest, their enclosure is very, very similar to the setup for the Caterpie line. They both live in large colonies that take over entire trees. And to be honest, Weedle would have a better chance surviving in a tree than Caterpie would because of its natural defenses. But even still, there are plenty of flying-type Pokemon that will power through just to get at an undefended Weedle. If you have a whole colony of Beedrill alongside the Weedle, then yeah, that's plenty of defense. But I'll talk about why that is a terrible idea later in this section. It would be better and safer for your Pokemon to keep it indoors until it reaches its final evolution. Weedle, being just a small worm-like Pokemon and only measuring a foot in length, can be kept in an enclosure in your house. In fact, I would recommend using the exact same setup that I described in the Caterpie line. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend the video, but I'll re-describe it here. The base of the enclosure should be 3 feet by 3 feet, and it should be 5 feet tall, offering some vertical space for the Pokemon to climb and explore. The frame can be either wood or metal. I just always prefer wood because it's easier to work with, but metal can provide a good sturdy frame if you want it. The sides can either be mesh or glass, but I recommend glass. I've heard of Weedle getting their horns caught in the mesh and tearing it while freeing themselves, and then you have a venomous Pokemon loose in your home. So glass will probably be the better, safer alternative. Inside, you can deck it with branches, either real or fake. The only thing with fake is that you'll need to make sure not to put fake leaves into the enclosure, because your Weedle will try to eat them, and that can lead to stomach problems and a Pokemon Center visit. Again, the Weedle line is one of the few evolutionary lines like the Caterpie line that become easier when it evolves. Kakuna is the same as Metapod. The chrysalis form doesn't move, it doesn't eat, it just needs to stay warm. It's just that Kakuna looks more sinister than a Metapod does, with the large black eyes, at least in my opinion. But just put it somewhere where it will stay warm and dry, and your Kakuna should be fine. But when it evolves, you'll want to make sure that it's outside when it does so. Beedrill can be problematic. Even when they don't mean to be harmful or dangerous, they have massive spikes for hands, and can cause some serious harm just by accident. So when your Kakuna is getting close to evolving, make sure that it's outside in a tree when it does so. When a Beedrill emerges from its Kakuna, wherever it is becomes its territory. So if it's in your house, then your house is now its territory. When your Kakuna is getting closer to evolving, you'll want to get the Beedrill's enclosure set up so that you can have it evolve outside. And a Beedrill's enclosure is going to be the same as Butterfree's, though a bit bigger. Make a wooden box, 5 feet on all sides, and hang it from just below the lowest branches of a tree. On the side that faces away from the tree, instead of another wooden side, install a heavy-duty rubber flap that it can push out of the way to get in and out, but won't allow things like rain and snow in. Just keep an eye on the box as time goes on. Thanks to those giant spikes that your Beedrill has for hands, it's going to end up scratching and scraping the inside up a lot as it moves around. Repairs will be needed eventually. But this box will provide an excellent safe spot for your Beedrill to live out of and be the center of what it considers to be its territory. Speaking of territory, let's talk about that, and what other Pokemon you'll be able to house with a Beedrill. Quick answer? Only other Weedle evolutions. Anything else, and it will be attacked by your Beedrill. And in my professional opinion, don't even house other Weedle evolutions with it. Nothing. Nada. Now, let me explain why I say that. A Beedrill's territorial instinct is partially just that, an instinct. But it's also something that it learns from the rest of the colony as a way to defend the younger Weedle and Kakuna that are living in the hive. So if you raise your Pokemon from a Weedle and keep it separate from any other Beedrill, then its territorial instinct won't be nearly as aggressive as one who was raised in a colony. Instead, it will only defend what it considers its home, which will be the tree that its box is housed in and approximately the surrounding 30 feet. As an added bonus, since you raise it as a Weedle and have been around it its entire life, it will consider you as a non-threat. You'll never be able to cuddle with it, but it shouldn't attack you when you're in its space. You'll just need to be vigilant for any other Beedrill colonies that pop up in the area, because if your Beedrill interacts with them, it will try to join their colony, and then you'll either lose your Beedrill to that colony, or that colony will reject and attack your Pokemon, which would be very bad for its health, obviously. So either keep them isolated from others of their own species, or only house it with those that you have raised, so as to not get swarmed when you enter their territory. Availability. While not as common as its twin Caterpie, Weedle are plenty common in the wild. I mean, if something can be considered a pest Pokemon, then by its very nature it's going to be a common sight. Believe me, my pest control friend I mentioned earlier loves bug Pokemon, even has a Beedrill of his own. But even he sometimes can't believe how many Weedle calls he gets a month. However, I don't recommend going out and catching one. It can be highly dangerous. Plenty of would-be Weedle owners have tried to catch one in the woods just to get swarmed by an entire nest of Beedrill. In many cases, the best way to get a Weedle is to buy one from a breeder. There are those out there who have managed to keep an entire colony of Weedle and its evolutions, but unfortunately those breeders are far and few between. Due to the difficulty in keeping more than one Beedrill in one place, and then needing to collect the younger Weedle to sell, many breeders consider Weedle a Pokemon that is more work than it's worth. And because of that fact, Weedle aren't nearly as available on the breeding circuit as Caterpie are. They're out there, you'll just have to put some work and money into getting one. Care. Fortunately, cleaning up after the Weedle line doesn't get much different from the Caterpie line. In the wild, a nest of Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill take over a tree or two as their nest, and the way that they do that is through string. The Weedle will wrap the branches and leaves and even sometimes the trunks of trees in their string to form a large nest that the rest of the colony can live in. So they will be attempting to do the same thing in their enclosure. Soon after placing your Weedle in its enclosure, you're going to start seeing large ropes of string start covering everything in it. Now, it's not technically a bad thing, as Weedle can't get caught or bound up in its own string, but things like rotting leaves and waste can. In the wild, Weedle usually just poop off the side of the tree. It falls to the ground and decomposes rather fast. But that won't happen in its enclosure. So about once a week you'll need to get in there and scrape away any string that's gross or covered in stuff. It will prevent it from starting to rot. I would suggest not scraping away all the string though. It will stress your Weedle out not having his string everywhere, and then he'll have to redo it all anyway. Best to leave any that are in good condition. Moving on from Weedle, Kakuna doesn't really do anything. It physically can't make a mess. I would just take it out of the Weedle enclosure and place it somewhere warm and dry. And Beedrill doesn't grow as much as Weedle, so it won't leave discarded exoskeleton in its box as often, and it poops outside. The occasional sweep of its box should be enough to handle Beedrill's mess. So the worst part of cleaning is going to come when it's young and still a Weedle. Aside from that, cleaning up after this line of Pokemon is pretty easy. Feeding them is just as easy too. When in the wild, all Weedle eat are the leaves off the trees they're infesting, so going outside and collecting a few handfuls of leaves should be enough. Just come inside and drop them into the enclosure with your Weedle. It will start to munch on them almost immediately. Eating is nearly the only thing that Weedle do. Do this once a day or whenever you see that your Weedle is out of food. Complement that with a water spigot that hangs on the side of the enclosure, and your Weedle should be poised to grow into a perfectly healthy Kakuna. And speaking of Kakuna, you don't have to feed it anything. Since your Pokemon is in a chrysalis-like state, it doesn't require food or water to remain healthy. Just place it in a spot that'll keep it warm and dry, and that's all the care you have to do for that. Now, some people look at Beedrill and think, wow, that's a big Pokemon. It must need a ton of food to eat every day. And look at those weapons it has for hands. There's no way that it's anything but a predator. But no, they actually aren't a predator at all. The large needles, while being intimidating and absolutely dangerous, are more for defending their territory than attacking. They may actively attack anything they perceive as a threat, but it isn't in an effort to eat whatever they're attacking. Beedrill actually have the same eating habits as Butterfree. They feed off pollen and nectar that they gather from nearby plants and flowers. So get a collection of flowers and plant them around the tree that'll be your Beedrill's home, and that should be good for them. Once the flowers bloom, there will be plenty for it to eat. If your flowers aren't blooming yet, or you just don't want to deal with the hassle of planting them, a feeder with honey in it works as well. I prefer to get my honey right from a comb farm, but the store brand stuff will be good too. And you can buy feeders online or at a Pokemon care store. I also want to mention that if you live in a colder area where winter is a thing, Then your Weedle evolution Pokemon will enter into a dormant state for the winter. At some point during the fall, they will enter their nest, whether that be a space that you provide them or a nest that they themselves made, and fall into a sort of hibernation state. This is perfectly natural, and there is no need to panic if you don't see your Pokemon for a couple of months. Just make sure that they will stay warm through the season, and will have plenty of food once they wake up in the spring. After such a long nap, they will be hungry. Oh, and this should be said, Weedle and its evolutions can survive a winter, but won't make it in an area that's always cold all year round. So places like Snow Point City or Snow Bell City would be bad spots for these Pokemon. Pretty much anywhere that has snow in the name won't be a good habitat for Weedle and company. Unless they live indoors, and an indoor Beedrill is not recommended. Cost. Weedle evolutions are a frustrating Pokemon to get a hold of. They aren't common in the breeding industry, mostly because they are such a pain, figuratively and literally, to raise, keep, and sell. So finding one for sale can be a bit of a pain. But they are so common in the wild. You hear about Weedle and Beedrill infestations all the time, and walk through almost any forest and you'll find a nest of them. But just catching one is dangerous enough that I wouldn't recommend it at all. So it's this infuriating feeling of, I see them everywhere, but I can't get a hold of one. But because of the inherent danger of getting one from the wild, most people do go through breeders. And with the low number of breeders to supply these Pokemon, and the effort involved in raising them, the price of these Pokemon will tend to be in the moderate range. Which, I'll admit, is unusual for a bug Pokemon, as they tend to be more common overall. But that is just how the Weedle market has settled over the years. The enclosure material will most likely cost around the moderate category as well. Between the material for the frame, the glass, and all the screws, bolts, and hinges, really this is going to be the same as the Caterpie and Butterfree enclosure. You'll have to build them once you get all the materials, but that shouldn't take too long or be too rough to do. There are the pre-made ones that you can buy online, of course, but they will put you in the higher end of the moderate price range. They're nice, and an Arceus send if you don't really have the technical skills to build your own enclosure, but you guys know me. I always prefer the homemade option over the store-bought one. Plus, in this case, it ends up being cheaper. Food will be the one place where you can potentially spend either the least amount of money or the most, depending. After all, for Weedle, all you need to do is go out and grab some leaves off the nearest tree. Free is the best price for food. But even if you don't have a spot where you can grab leaves off the nearest tree, you can order them online for very low prices. They come in massive big bags for real cheap. Beedrill's flowers are where you might spend more money. Flowers, for some unknown reason to me, can cost quite a lot depending on the kinds you get and how many you get. Really any kind of flower will do, so if you can find some wildflowers to transplant around your Beedrill's enclosure, then that'll make the flowers free as well. But if you want to get specific flowers, then the price can be anywhere between low and the high part of moderate. Like I said, flowers are strangely expensive. Conclusion. In my opinion, the Weedle line is for more experienced bug handlers. Between the venom and the territorial behavior of the last evolution, only people that know what they are doing and how to handle something like that should handle them. Like my friend Logan. He has a Beedrill of his own, and even he sometimes says that it's a tough bug to handle. And this man dives headfirst into Venipede nests. So if you're considering getting a Weedle evolution, be sure that you can handle it, because they can become too much. But for those out there who have the skill and the know-how to handle this tough bug, it may end up being your perfect Pokemon partner. Thank you so much for listening, and please join us next time as we go over the flying type Pokemon, Pidgey and its evolutions. Have a wonderful day, everyone.